That's hilarious. That's funny.
Can I tell you my greatest fear going into this with you, Melissa? Is
What?
that I say something that totally sounds like mansplaining.
That's not ever good. I've never, ever experienced that from
Well, that's good to know, but my wife definitely has. She has pointed it out to me. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
This is why we hit record before we actually start recording, because this kind of stuff right here.
I do think, though, that, I'll call it out also. Yeah, and so we won't need to worry about it.
That's true. I'm grateful.
So, Melissa, mansplaining is when...
Thank you. Oh, my gosh.
Welcome back to the Ministry Without Hating It podcast, a ministry of Odyssey Haven coaching and counseling dedicated to the pursuit of answering the question, is it possible to do ministry without hating it? We have a theory that it just might be. I am Chad Garrison. I'm here with Brenton Hill.
Good afternoon.
And hi, Brenton. And we're also joined today by our friends, fellow pastors, Pastor Melissa Brotherton and Pastor Timmy Hensel. Guys, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
I thought you were teeing me up early, man. I just sorry about that.
At the same time, it's it's fine. We're not editing any of this. This is all going in. All of this is going into the episode. We brought them back. So if you've been listening, they were both guests last season, and post interview, we're like, we got to have them back on. And do you guys have any ideas to maybe send around a discussion type of thing? And we're here with another Shop Talk episode. This is where we focus on topics that are unique to the ministry leader, and then we unpack them in a practical way. And when I asked for topics, you both had some, and we're definitely going to hope to have you guys back on and do some more. But the one that stood out that we wanted to start with actually came from Timmy, and it was a simple question you said that you like to ask, and that is, who are you discipling? I'm curious. I know this wasn't on the list, and you reminded me of that just before we jumped on. But when did you start asking this question?
Yeah, as I think back, I know my wife and I we realized the questions that we were asking our staff and team leads were primarily focused around events or programs or things that we were. So it was recapping, not that those things weren't important to know, like, hey, what did we do well, all of that. But there was something to a challenge and check from the Holy Spirit as we're realizing that we really wanted a culture of discipleship, that we were really dependent on the programs. And so when programs stopped, discipleship stopped. And so we're like, wait a minute, how do we do this? And we started noticing things that we were doing as leaders, and started noticing in my son as well, that we're continuing whether something was going on like Rooted or OSL or any of those different types of programs that we still do think are important and are kind of springboards. But we just had this realization of, like, you know what? A priority question that shows this is what we really care about is, who are you discipling? And so we started asking that question to our staff and team leads probably a couple of years ago, I would say. And it started like, people were like, wait a minute, this is a question. There was a lot of silence at first, because I think there was also, people had to say, oh, wait, we tend to think sometimes, is this just at the church focus? Because people were discipling kids, they were discipling their own children. Like, there were different contexts where it was happening. So we had to kind of open that up.
What maybe both of you or one of you can jump in on this question, and maybe for like a frame of reference moving forward. When we say discipling or discipleship, that can be a pretty broad and general thing, and it can be specific to, I think I read there's a great book called DiscipleShift that if you were to ask a room full of people, what does it mean to be a disciple? Everybody would have a different interpretation, and they wouldn't be wrong, but it would be to their context. So what then, maybe as a more generalized, and this is our definition of a disciple, what does that mean to you?
I love how you're asking. You've already asked 2 questions now that were not.
This is what happens when you drop things into Chat GPT, and I'm like, wait a second, we didn't think about this first. You're right. Yeah. You're right. I'm sorry, it's all good. And I will stick to the script after this. I promise.
Fine. Melissa, do you want to take that one, or?
I think that's just part of the complication, as you said, when you ask a group of people, because people have been given different expectations or understanding of what it means to disciple others. And that sometimes leads to confusion when, Timmy would ask that question, maybe because if we consider discipleship within a context of it has to be within a course, or it has to be this type of, like, these are the boundaries and the rules and the expectations of what it means to disciple someone, then someone might come back and go, well, I'm not qualified to do that, or I'm not currently in a role where that's expected of me. But my personal idea of discipleship is, I guess that the 2 Timothy 2:2 of just follow me as I'm following, that I am sharing with you the things I've received that you will then go on to share with others, who will then share it with others. And so this idea of following in Jesus's footsteps and living my life in the way he did, and then imparting that, or to others as I'm engaging in life with them. So it's messy and multifaceted and nuanced and hard and scary.
Yes.
A contact sport is what I like to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to quantify.
It's not cookie cutter.
Yeah.
Cookie cutter, it's much easier the other way.
In it, this is what you do and this is how to do it. And I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
Which slides back to Timmy's, what he was saying with the programs, kind of a thing. And we're going to unpack all that. And I appreciate you guys taking the monkey wrench and just working with it. So Timmy, how would you define that?
Yeah, I think Melissa really, that's a beautiful description, especially the understanding of the messiness of it and how nuanced it can be. I actually, like, when you did ask that question, I did think of like Jesus and in Eastern times and rabbi relationship of there is an element of mimicking, of becoming like a following, of hearing and practicing, of doing, a presence with. And so I think it is that walking with. There is an element of presence. There's an element of watching and seeing and doing and applying and asking. There's so much there that is not one way, but there is a interaction. And so to become like someone, it can't just be from a like if it's authentic and real, it can't just be like I say and do the things that I just witnessed. There has to be an understanding and application of it as well. And so it requires discussion. It requires application. There's a lot there that I think in order to follow, there's practice in there as well.
I think too, like, I think about it as me being a parent, and I know not everybody who is going to be listening to this is a parent, so I don't want to make that assumption. But as a parent, there's an element of with my kids where at first it was just telling them, this is the rules, this is the expectation, follow this. Like, we're not dialoguing about it. This is just what the expectation is, and we're setting a foundation. But then as they grow and as they develop, I have to shift how I parent into more coaching and into more releasing and trusting, and that's terrifying. And and then you get to a spot where you're more like, and so I think in the same way we have to have this idea of, you see Jesus with the disciples, or you just think about how people are in their relationship with God maturing. And so there's an element where, like, the OSLs and the the rooted, and a lot of those are really great because they set that foundational framework that's the telling portion, but we have to get to the spot where we move away from and engage deeper with where people are at. And so that's why it's hard, because some people need that class like foundation didactic element. And we don't want to throw that out by saying, oh, we just, are going to just be in relationship, because some people really need you to tell them what to do.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more. I don't think it's a one size fits all, as we've said. It does take all things, but knowing what you're looking for and what the target is, I think helps maybe work backwards in some of that. And so the reason I asked that question, because that was actually something that we really needed to define in our context here, because it helped us be able to celebrate and know when we were actually beginning to see like benchmarks that were hit, or if there's actual progress taking place. And actually taking from that same book that I mentioned earlier, and we'll put that in the show notes as well. But the disciple of Christ really simply goes to, the definition comes from when Jesus was inviting them to come and follow me, and I'll make you into fishers of men. And so that the disciple of Christ is someone who follows Jesus, is transformed by Jesus, and then joins in the mission of Jesus. And it begins to help us as we walk through and go, this is what a disciple of Christ looks like. This is how we know. And that there's relationship with that, the whole as you go translation that goes within that. I appreciate you guys, like I said, taking just a quick diversion. I was like, we need to set that up just a little bit. So let me ask you this, and you can both answer this. Why do you think asking the question, especially when you say, who are you discipling? Why is that such a revealing thing? And has anybody ever given you the honest answer of no one?
Yeah. I think that question, when we ask that question, it shows the priority of this is what we care about, we want to hear about. And so sometimes I'll get silence. Sometimes I've gotten like a shame response of, and then it just takes some pulling out to realize, you are actually discipling people. And then sometimes it's testimony, which helps create that culture because you're celebrating what is happening and just make space for that.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I think that it is an important question, because it's a question that I think Jesus will ask us one day. Like, this is like the mission of what it means to be Christ-centered. I wanted to, Melissa said something that I think is so important, and I have a feeling we're going there, but Melissa was talking about you shared about how we have to get that shift from just being about the didactic, the one way, almost like where we depend on information to go out. And that actually, it reminded me of something with what is needed for discipleship to occur, that is like Jesus did, is you see he's not giving a lot of information, but what is needed is what I think Bonhoeffer refers to. We have a ministry of telling, and what is needed is, as he says, a ministry of listening. And so that there's an element of that shift, as she described, from parenting, where it shifts, where it's not just so much information of don't touch the stove, don't, like there's a shift of, hey, can this be about curiosity? Can this be about listening to what they're saying and shifting those moments to questions instead of information? That we have to do this with those that are following us as well. It's so important, because otherwise we're still discipling, and almost like babies or infants or toddlers. But we want them to mature.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just think sometimes we talk about how we have people in our churches who maybe have been Christians, like that's the common phrase, right? Of like, I've got 20 years of 1-year-old Christians or something, they've been in church for 20 years, but they're not a 20-year-old Christian. They're over and over a 1-year-old Christian. And I think I have to recognize, again, going back to the parenting idea, I have to recognize where I'm hindering my children from growing because I'm providing things that they don't actually need, or I'm not holding them accountable, or, so I think there's an element too of that where we have to recognize the things we're doing in our discipling that might actually be holding people back too, because there isn't that same expectation of them. So yeah, it's a shifting for everyone.
Yeah.
A change in how we do things.
I had the privilege. I know, Melissa, you know them as well, and I'm not sure if you guys do, but Jessie Kruchenk and her husband Bob are really good friends, close Paulers, and she has been a part of my life for a long time with the Gateway District, discipleship, that culture, discussions I've had with her in her house. She's done some stuff. We've had her to do things at the church as well. She wrote a book called Ordinary Discipleship. And as I was thinking, I'm like, I can't talk about discipleship without mentioning some of the things that I've learned from her.
Yeah.
Just from a culture, that her idea is that we got to take it away from like top down and release it and empower it out to everyone can disciple. And one of the things that on the same topic that I wrote down just to share, that she shares, that she says, I think the idea that we use information to help people transform, it's not just wrong biblically, but also wrong biologically. We're created to be transformed through relationship, through mirroring one another,
that's good.
through going on and experience the goodness of God. Information actually inoculates us to actually being transformed. And that just like hit me really hard, because information is good. But if I'm depending on just in a overly information world that we live in, where it's at our fingertips, we maintain 5 to 10% of it. And so we got to make that shift to it being relational. There is the word I was looking for. So that we're retaining, because if we apply it, doesn't it jump? If we're applying it, it's like 70%. And if we're teaching it, it's like 90%. I'm like, what in the world?
Yeah.
We gotta make this shift.
So what then? Because we've talked about how, and I almost want to say, like, when you asked, because I think when you'd asked the question, you said, just doing classes or preaching and teaching doesn't count. That doesn't mean that's not a part of it. It's passing along information, because we don't want to minimize that. But what then? We talked about the life on life. When you start to unpack that, or even as you had mentioned, empowering others to do this as well, because you can only do so much, right? And I mean, Jesus even modeled that for us. He had the 3, and then he had the 12, and then it kind of went out from there. So then what does that begin to look like for you? You both serve in, senior lead pastor roles. How have you taken this on, not just in a personal sense, but as you're also passing this on to others to say, you go and do this as well?
I think ideally where I've seen it work best in my life is when it's unscheduled. There's like the Hawthorne effect. That's when people recognize they're being observed, that they shift their behaviors. So I think there's an element of the relationship. Just how are we inviting people into our lives and joining with them in theirs, to be able to get a real understanding of who they are and where they're at in their walk with God, and where they're at in the things that they're experiencing and walking through. I am not, I'm still trying to figure that out. Like, I think that it can be really difficult because there's responsibilities and things that we have to do. And so I love, Daniel Brown always, talks about, we don't use people to get things done. We use things to get people done. And I think one of my best discipling relationships ever was when I had someone who was helping me with some administrative stuff and things in the office. And when we were like and we were just chatting. So every Friday they'd come in and they'd do some paperwork or do things, but we would just chat and connect. And I learned about her life, and I would share with her about mine. And from there I discovered that she had a call to ministry that I wasn't aware of. And then we talked about her getting licensed, and she went on to get licensed, and to like, she did great things. And that's something that wouldn't have come up if I would have said, hey, can you come and do this paperwork stuff for me, and I was in another room doing something else. Like, that was because of that consistent just conversations. And so I think sometimes when I show up to places thinking I'm discipling someone, or they show up like I'm here to be discipled, we inadvertently take on a posture that isn't genuine, because we're trying to be discipled or be a discipler. And so
Yeah.
there's something about that unscheduled that is hard, but also that's the place where I mean, I aspire to that. That's where I've had the greatest discipling and renewal of someone's mind and transformation, is through that.
I think I need to caveat with this. It's important that you all know that like I'm still in the middle of trying to figure this thing out. Of we're shifting.
Great.
Like, yeah, I know, huh? You thought you.
We're supposed to have the answer on this episode. What are you doing? Like,
yeah.
No, that's fine. We'll workshop it with you.
Yeah, but there are things that have been happening that just starting to pay attention to and say, wait a minute, that we're making some shifts as well, of not trying to be so dependent. And I think as I look back at what has been successful, or where I've seen it, it's really an invitation. I just sense the Holy Spirit sometimes says that one, and just being mindful of like who, because the invitation, you actually are inviting somebody into a very vulnerable space. It requires like presence, intentionality, vulnerability. It's a sacrifice. Like there's a lot to it that maybe hinders us from doing that. The accountability piece of like, so for instance, I have a few guys, including my son, that we read a book of the Bible together. And it was just literally like, Lord, who do you want me in this season? What does it look like? Who am I inviting in? And to my 3 space. And I like that you highlighted the 3, the 12, the 70 aspect. And so it was just an invitation of like, hey, you want to read this book of the Bible with me? And so every day we take a chapter a week. We're in Romans now. We've done Proverbs, done John, First, Second. Like we've been doing different, but like we just we slow it down. And so we'll do Romans, and we'll go back and forth where what verse highlighted, what questions are there, how apply. And there's been this like, because some are just growing in their faith, and they're starting to get questions, and it was a lot of me as giving information, and now I'm like, well, wait a minute. So you just asked this question about Abraham. Where can you go find the answer to that question? That Romans, where Paul's talking about, do you want to go read a Genesis? And I want you to answer these questions for me. And so like, we're making that shift a little bit from where I'm just delivering the information to you can go find the answer. And so, but really it is an invitation. In can I just say the thing that is maybe scary for some people sometimes?
Yes, please.
The accountability isn't for them. It's also on us too, when we invite people into that. And so, if you don't show up, they notice that too. And you're committing to do something with them. And so it's beneficial on both ends. It's beneficial that I am committing to my son, and there's days like I traveled a lot in this last week. It was not as consistent. And I felt that. I was like, you know what? I apologize. Because I got out of the rhythm, all of that. So there is a level of ownership, but then they get to see you own stuff too. So anyway, just some things.
There's like transformation that happens all the way around. Like you were saying earlier, like when we teach it, it's like the 90% that begins to get back in it. And so you know what you're supposed to do, and then walking these things out in real life, like not on paper with an outline for you, but I got real people with real problems, and they're right. And so there's a level of transformation that's happening as I'm helping in that space. And also I'm now accountable in that same, and it seems like, at least in my context, I see it where I keep getting these opportunities over and over with different people. And every time we do, it's a different situation, but I am more transformed after each encounter. And so it's so necessary just across the board for my own growth. And that seems selfish. I think that seems really selfish, but Jesus commanded us. This was our job in like caring for the world that he left us. And so we're doing that, but also it's the give and take, and Jesus is right there in the process of all of it. I see just transformation all the way around.
Yeah.
Well, I might even reframe it for you, not necessarily selfish, but more it sounds self-aware, because you realize that this is also good for me. So that I look forward to receiving something from it. So Timmy, did I step on that?
I was gonna, Brenta, I was just gonna say, I actually don't think that, first off, you're not a person who strikes me as selfish. Let me just say, let me start with that.
It's true.
But to reframe, I've used that language myself over and over and over again. And the truth of of what you're saying is that I think it's actually kingdom, because I am receiving and giving. And so that's kingdom language. It's not selfish. I think what would be selfish is that I'm getting and not giving, or
right.
And that's not the case here. But I think that's important that we kind of, as Beth Ackroyd was saying, double click on that, that we open that up, because this is something that we deal with constantly. And I'm really glad you shared that, because this is about mutuality. This is about receiving. This is about giving. And that's kingdom. That's beautiful.
You ask, one of the questions you have later is what fears or barriers keep leaders from doing this.
That's the
and
question
I think
now. Let's go.
This fits perfectly with it, because I think, when I talked with you guys before, we talked about the Billy Graham rule and how that has hindered men and women from engaging with one another and discipling with one another. And I think there's another unspoken rule that we hear quite a bit from leaders, is that we're not supposed to be friends with the people in our church. Like, I just had someone speak that to me last week. She was a brand new she'd just been licensed and stepped into a leadership role, and she was talking about, like, it's been so hard because all the people I was friends with before, I can't be friends with them in the same way. And I had to tell them, I can't be friends with you in the same way, because I have things that I can't like share, or, I'm dealing with things that are confidential. And I just think that there's this idea that we get told that even if we don't ascribe to it, it is implicitly there for us, that we can't be friends or in genuine relationship with the people we're leading. And that's how we end up with these pastors that have these moral failures and the leadership abuses. And because we get to a spot where they don't have anyone who's genuinely in their life, and you think you have to show up in a certain way. I have to be the leader. I have to have all the answers. I can't show my, that I didn't do so well on my, reading this week, that in the group I'm leading, or we show up with a posture that is not genuine. And we see Jesus showing them his grieving and his sorrow and his fears and his vulnerabilities. And we need to be as equally willing to receive from the people we're discipling and leading because it's that mutuality of submission, right? From Ephesians, of we are to be submitted to one another.
Yeah,
And
that's good.
so that's how we lead well. And that's what keeps us, because I'm messing up all the time. Like, I didn't get appointed as a lead pastor and suddenly become someone different who has all the answers. Like, I'm still me and I'm a mess. And so I have to have people who are in my life all the time be able to speak into that and speak to me. And also it sets up, when we create this barrier or boundary of like, I can't be in a genuine relationship with you, then the people in our congregation think, I can't let the pastor know who I really am, or how I really feel about this, or what's really going on, because they might judge me, or I might lose out on an opportunity or whatever. And so we have to be able to have this like actual relationship. And yes, of course there's boundaries, and there's still, but that's like genuine boundaries that we have in life. Like, but it is important to have these relationships in these spaces where we are receiving from the people we're leading, just as much as they're receiving from us.
That's good. That's good. I want to speak to something and that is really interesting. You've all said it, and all of us actually at some point or another. And it's a word that kept coming back, and I think look to Jesus' example, and it's that word invitation, and how powerful just the invitation alone can be. And it can be as simple as like, hey, where do would you like to get coffee or lunch or whatever, and that when you go to somebody and you invite, you're already placing value on them that is received. Maybe they've never received that, and that can begin to change a lot of things. How have you guys seen, this is not one of the questions, sorry, but how have you seen that type of thing? I'm just off the cuff, shooting from the hip here today. I'm so sorry.
No, you're not.
But we do. You're right. Sorry, not sorry. I'm sharpening you both. Look at that. How have you guys seen that play out, especially when we're talking about maybe the barriers, some of the fears that we have, and maybe you're even a leader who's a little more introverted, and that can be a harder thing to just maybe put yourself out there because you get so focused on just doing the ministry versus engaging in it, if that makes sense.
I think I love Jesus with the woman at the well, and the example we have there of him asking her for something and providing her with value and honor of being able to say, I can receive from you. And so I think to be able to invite people into relationship and invite them into something helps, that it is, I mean, we always say platform announcements do nothing, right? It's like the personal invitation. And
That's
so
true.
when we invite someone into something that says, I see you and I want to know you more. And I think to be able to ask the question of like, hey, I'd love to hear your story. I'd love to learn more about you. I'd love to connect. Like that gives people value. And it says, I have something that I can receive from you that isn't just, hey, I really think you could do with some discipleship. You're really messed up, and I'd like to come and correct you.
Let's start a class.
Yes.
I think you would really benefit from this class because you're a hot mess.
Look, everybody can see it. We all know. I'm just making that step forward. Stay in the quiet part.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that example. I do think the invitation is important, and we got to know what we're inviting people into, because if we give an invitation that we can't follow through with or not clear about, we set people up with their own expectations and disappointments, and so getting clear on, hey, here's what I'm asking, here's what this looks like. And I agree that it shows that we do care, we do see, and when I'm giving the invitation, I want it to be because the Lord is asking me to do that. That this is who He wants me to spend my time, and to lay that before Him. Lord, who is the priority? This is why my son is one of the three, like in this space, because I can't give, you guys know our lives, what it is to be ministers, and I have two separate responsibilities plus family, all that, and so I don't want to overly commit what I can't. The invitation there has to be an element of what am I inviting you to, and do you agree? Because sometimes we invite and we're not clear, and then we get disappointed because they're not engaged, they're pulling away. It's one-sided, and so I think there's an element of, this is what I'm asking. Do you want to do this with me? And if not, it's okay. This is the season that we don't have to do this. So,
yeah,
so good.
That's good. Well, and thank you for being vulnerable in that space of, like I said, I'm kind of walking out, but you did say something I thought was really key within that, is also understanding your own limits within that what is, am I trying to do something that maybe even Jesus hasn't asked me to do? And that, it doesn't, yes, there is sacrifice involved, but that's not for the sake of sacrificing, other things, whether that be family, whether it be even your own health, because, you're not living within those healthy limits and rhythms that we're called to be living in to begin with. And so, because I'll be honest, that can be something that weighs on me. Like, am I doing enough, or, am I meeting enough, or, or am I making myself available? And, there's that's a whole different maybe topic that we can get into, but I think it's understanding. And I think you said earlier to me, the, listening to the Holy Spirit and say that's the one that right there. In fact, I had a real interesting, just this past week, we have a monthly men's event that we do. It's just kind of, it's real, no strings attached, but there's prayer involved, and it's eating wings. We call it Wing Club for Men. And it's one of my favorite things. And we, after like during a service or after, there were several guys that I hadn't seen in a while that, there, and I was just like, hey, you going to Wing Club? And you should come. And every single person that I invited, and I don't say I have this power or anything like that, but they showed up, and it became this thing of oh, there's really something to that, especially when, as the leader, I'm leading the way within that, how that becomes, infectious. We're in cold season, right? So, but that's the only word I can think of right now. It becomes part of the culture, kind of a thing, which actually is a question that I wanted to circle back to. That's also one of the questions. Okay,
thank you,
but
Chad.
I thought of, as you guys were speaking, you're welcome. You're welcome. What have you guys seen that happens to kind of what I just talked about? But what have you seen that happens inside of the culture of your own churches when you as leaders are modeling this kind of personal discipleship?
Yeah. So this is where the implicit becomes explicit, where you just start to see things and you see the pattern. And so I realize that my wife and I are people who don't hold on to our power, we release it. And so what I noticed is, if I look at my staff, since I've been here, the kids pastor raised up a kids pastor and released that authority. Our youth pastors raised up their replacement and released it. I raised up as executive and now released that. And so my wife was over the teaching team, and everything is raised up and empowered teaching. We have a teaching team as well. And so it has become a culture where people are discipling, raising, and empowering, releasing as well. Seeing it in just our family, our youth pastor. We had prayed for youth pastors that would be people of presence who walk with kids, and they're people that show up, invite them to their home, are discipling them, play games with them. They have they have people that they are invested in. They show up. to many different things. And so there's an element of presence that's with that too, but there's a culture that is here of people who are actually doing those things that we had really hoped for, and we were doing it, and just now we're like, oh, this is important. This is what we want to continue to do. And so and this is where we had to make that shift of, this is what we are doing as leaders, but we were still depending on some of these programs or classes to do the discipleship without the follow-up of like, hey, which I know with Rooted, it's meant to have life groups, that there are things that's fun, but how do we make that shift from, hey, this is a launching or a platform that can become something even more, to where the leader of that group, even with Rooted, like they're raising up the next leader as well, and so on and so forth, that there has to be some multiplication from that.
That's good. I think the shift comes to, in even what you were talking about with, I have to be mindful of how many people I have capacity for, and some of the boundaries, and that still can, I know when I'm in that space, it's still be with the idea of like, I'm the one that's responsible for discipling everybody. And there's an idea that the pastor is the one who's supposed to be discipling everyone. And so I think when we can get to a place where we've really had that infiltrate into the culture of the congregation of, we are doing this, we are the church, we are on mission together, this is all, like, we all have the capacity to disciple someone. If you're just a step ahead of someone, there's somebody that, or in step with someone, there's something that you can be sharing that you've received. And so that's a huge shift in culture, and that takes I feel like I didn't feel like I necessarily could answer that question of what does it look like when it's transformed, because I'm in the process, I'm on the runway, and it's it's been 4 years, so I'm on the runway of trying to shift culture to that idea of, this is what discipleship is, and we're all involved in the process, and it can't just be me meeting with everybody in the church for coffee.
Yeah.
Like it has to be, I can't personally be meeting with everyone, not because like, oh, I have too much on my plate or whatever, but like, I shouldn't be me.
Yeah.
Their voices are important. They need, like, I need others that are having their imprint on this church as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just thinking that's it won't actually multiply unless we do what Melissa just said.
Right. It's like just addition at that point.
Yeah. We have to make we stop with making disciples instead of making disciples who make disciples who make disciples, like there has to be that, we have to have the vision for that. And we have to help people do that too, because,
right.
For the same reasons that prevent us.
Well, so that perfect segue, and it just kind of piggyback on that. You both had mentioned like the shame portion that people might deal with maybe when you start with this question of who are you discipling, and this doesn't have to necessarily be specific to maybe those on your staff or your team or leadership, but then others as well when you're talking about just what you just said of, no, I'm discipling you so you can go and disciple others. So how do you walk with people who, in one sense, I think the question was worded like you're holding people accountable to this, like this is important, this is what we do, but then still walking with that shame factor, that it doesn't have to be a shame or it doesn't have to be a pressure that you feel I've got to get and do this. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think shame always comes when things are hidden. And when we feel like we have to protect it or hide it from things, right? And so if the question is being asked regularly and it's being asked with curiosity, and with an idea, the difference in my mind, I don't feel like the Holy Spirit ever causes us to feel guilt or shame. The conviction of the Holy Spirit always comes with hope and joy and love. And so I feel like if we are approaching people, or if that question's being asked in a way that causes this idea, people are gonna, obviously, people at first when they're encountering it, it's gonna cause shame because you think I've messed up, or I've missed the mark. But if it's a consistent question that's being asked, and it's conversational, and it's asked with that idea of, curiosity and support, and this is something we're called to do, and so how can I help you with that, or what does that look like? And even Timmy, you mentioned it, of like showing people, hey, you are discipling people, you don't even know, because you have this idea of what it is. And so the more we can make it part of the conversation, and regularly engage with it, that removes the shame from it, because it doesn't become, okay, once a year I'm checking in on you, have you been flossing? No.
Right.
Yes, I flossed this morning.
Oh.
but that, I just think, like, the enemy wants us to feel shame because it makes us feel like we've lost out on something, or we are disappointing. And so
the feeling of I'm not enough, I fail, and not, that's an invitation into more, into conversation, into evaluation, into like what God's doing in and through, and yeah, those are, shame does that. It just masks, it's that shadow that just masks everything, and that's all you can see is I failed, or and it becomes self-focused, and all of those things that shame does.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's being asked in the context of a mentoring or a discipling relationship anyways. Like, we saw Jesus disciple his people and provide them with a model for how to serve people, and then he sent them out, but then he asked them to come back and said, tell me about what happened, and debriefed it and corrected, and then sent them out again. And so it's not, we shouldn't just be like, okay, I've discipled you for 6 months. Now I'm launching you out into the world, and you're on your own. Go disciple others. But it's still, okay, now that as you're discipling others, how can I help you in that process of what does it look like? And we should be being discipled as we're discipling others. And so it should be, as long as there's that like continued conversation and accountability and support, then it becomes not so much shame, but growth.
Yeah. Awareness brings growth.
Yeah. I think how you ask the question, to your point, Melissa, is important. When I'm asking it at our staff and team lead, it's just I don't expect everyone to go around and name the people, or that's going to be when we have our one-on-ones. Like, hey, tell me about who you're discipling in a relational, and that's where we can have, where trust is built between us. We're not a punitive leader. Tisha's not a punitive leader. When we ask questions, we're able to walk through that process because trust has been built. Where and trust is built when you face things, conflict, difficulty, and how we respond in those moments helps build it. And so there is that relational component, but there is also when we're in that bigger setting of hey, this is the priority, and this is why we're asking the question, so that it's always, they know that question is gonna come up, and I better be doing it myself, but how do you shift the shame? I think that is so important, because that there is a default response with that every time, right? And so I think a part of it, this is the vulnerability aspect. Like, I have to share where I felt that and how I've overcome. Like, hey,
good.
this is, I felt it with my kids a lot. And there's been some moments where I want to go back to my younger self and just like do some coaching. Hey, we could have done some things a little better. Still a lot of things right now that can do better, but just owning it and growing from it and admitting it and sharing what you went through and how you overcame, and that this is about growth. It's not about all the things, how horrible of a leader I am, all this, all that stuff that we go down the toilet bowl with. So, yeah.
Sure. So what are some, we've talked about the multiplying aspect of it. What are some of the things that maybe they're barriers or maybe they're missteps, things that we need to own that actually would actually hinder maybe that multiplication or even stop it altogether?
Yeah, I think first, I mean, obviously, like that question that, or the unspoken rule before of how we're supposed to be in relationship with people that we are leading, can definitely be a hindrance. But I think not setting clear expectations and boundaries. Jesus invited them into, come and follow me and I will make you. Like, so there was an invitation of what the relationship was going to look like and what the outcome was going to be. And so he had clarity on that for them of what they were being invited into, like Timmy had mentioned before. I think our own personal, like, we have to be in relationship with the Holy Spirit and with God, and like have healthy boundaries and rhythms. And, like if we're an unhealthy leader and then we think I'm just supposed to be discipling people, we're going to disciple what we are at
That's
that
right.
moment.
Oh, that's right.
So,
yeah, you teach what you know, you reproduce who you are. Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yep. So, and then doing it for the wrong, doing it for the wrong reasons, or like jumping it, like, I just think there can be, it just really does need to be guided by the Holy Spirit and guided by health. Yeah. And thinking we should do it all, or, control, neglect. We can be too controlling in it, or we can be neglectful and just like, okay, go do this. And so those are, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking a lot about Jesus's example of how he discipled others. And of course, with the whole, like, you had two rabbis at those times. You got the Pharisees, you got Jesus, and they seem to be different, right? And there's this element where Jesus is allowing people to do things earlier than I think the Pharisees would, where he's empowering, releasing people who are younger, who aren't as trained as long. There's a lot there that is messy, that is very risky. And so, Melissa, you said something that just like kind of burned in my heart a little bit. This is very risky because people are going to make mistakes. They're going to say and do things, but this is why a relationship is so important. Following up, owning things, like, okay, you did this thing. How do we own this? But like, so with the Pharisees, you have this like mimicking practices, purity, the oral teaching. You have to earn and grow and get into authority, and to where Jesus is like, yeah, they're not even saved yet, and sending them out, kind of stuff, like, they're leading others and sharing stories. And I don't even know if we really think about it, what did they even, like, were they even fully committed until after his resurrection? Like, there's some theological questions there that I think we still wrestle with.
That's good. Yeah.
So like Pharisees are like outward compliance, and Jesus is like inward heart transformation. And so like, if he's seeing that happen, it's not just about the compliance aspect. And so I think the control of when is it appropriate, and this is one of the questions that I'm kind of jumping all over a little bit, but when do you release people? I think that's an important question, because I do think that you got to walk, especially if you're caring for like vulnerable, the like children, like there is an element of, we got to have some trust here. So we are going to walk this out together. Are you teachable? Are you humble? Like, there's some character things that we gotta be able to identify there. And so have we had conflict, and how did that interaction go? Did you receive correction? So I don't know that there's a timeline or exact formula for what that looks like, but I do think the lens in which we need to look through is character. The lens in which we need to look through is, do we have somebody teachable? And we definitely need to be allowing opportunities for people to serve and grow and apply, and not wait till they're perfect, because who's there before they can finally, because that what we're actually reinforcing in that is an authoritarian or you have to grow, learn, become this before. And that's not Jesus. In fact, Jesus was I'm sorry, I'm just going to go here. Jesus was go opposite, and we have to be the same as leaders. Jesus, the kenosis, he emptied himself, right? He laid down his divine privileges. He washed his disciples' feet. He shows us this upside down releasing of power, releasing of his, laying down his authority and serving humanity, loving humanity. And he spoke, he did all those things, but we are to do the same with those that we lead as well, where we're releasing power and authority, not holding on to it until they're just like us up at this level. It's the upside down kingdom there of following the Lord's example, where he empowers and releases.
I love that. That is a lot of my heart, even in ministry. But I can see why that would make people get a little like freaked out, to be honest, because you're like, well, they don't really know. What if they don't know the word all the way? Or what if they, and to which my reply is usually like, I Googled this stuff too. You know that, right?
Yeah.
Like I've been doing this for a while, and even I don't know where, and even Paul says somewhere it says, so I'm allowed to do that as well. And then hit the internet and find out exactly where that is. And so you're right. I think there's this kind of like, rigid thing that we can hold. And you said you're going there, but it's actually something I had highlighted that was one of the questions. And I think it's kind of in the same vein. If Jesus pastored a modern church today, what do you think he'd probably do different, or even stop altogether? I mean, you talked about some of that, like what we would probably do when it comes to those who are discipling others. But I'm curious, when it comes to this, what do you think he'd do differently?
I'm going to pass this question on to Melissa.
I think it's interesting to note that every time that Jesus was speaking to large gatherings, well, one, Jesus definitely went and spoke in a synagogue, right? But pretty much every time he did, they wanted to kill him. So that's important to note afterwards.
Fair.
So I don't know if that he'd think Sunday mornings were very important or not, but no. I also think it's important to note that when he did public addresses, a lot of times the people, he would tell a parable or he'd tell a story, but his main teaching and deeper teaching wasn't within that context. People would be ministered to, they'd receive healing, or they'd receive release from captivity of spirits. That was when some of these things happened, was in the larger group context. They'd be fed, but I don't think that they were receiving in the same way. That was saved for when he was taking his disciples away and having the smaller conversations, which then they were required to go out and do likewise. So I think that his emphasis would be less on, I mean, it's easy. I think it's cliche to be like, Jesus wouldn't have Sunday services. Jesus would just be out there, and I do think there's an element of truth to that. I also think contextually we're in a different culture than what Jesus was in, and we have to be aware of that.
Sure.
But I think that really what we're seeing is that he was not prioritizing those larger conversations. He recognized that the transformation and the renewal was happening, and the impartation was happening in those relational contexts, and saving that for there. I think maybe Timmy, with your role in the district, the regional level, for me, I'm like, people should be sent out. Everybody should be discipling it every time. Like, I get character. We need to have character. And like, you've seen the mess that happens when people don't have character and are sent out too early and given authority too early. So I see the benefit of that. But I also think that really Jesus, when he told his followers, he said, go and make disciples. That was to everyone. And so they were being imparted with the Holy Spirit. So I think that there's he would really be emphasizing this idea of everyone everyone is responsible equally for this mission, that's ministry that's happening. And so I think we try to um I think pastors today are trying to shift the boat. We had gotten to such a spot of like the leaders and the pastors are the ones doing all the work in the ministry, and we're trying to shift that. That's a cultural shift we're having to make. And it's hard, but it really is this idea of like everyone is really responsible and has the empowerment and the call to be discipling and sharing. And that's really just sharing what God's done and how he's moving in your life. And this is how it's worked for me.
That's good.
And so so discipling for someone could be as simple as, having the conversation of like, hey, this is what I'm dealing with, and going, hey, this is how God did that for me, or this is what I've learned. And I'm still trying to figure it out, but this is what I've learned. And so I don't know if that answers that question or not.
Absolutely. No, I thought that was really well said.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, there's almost like a question within the question here of like, because what we're actually talking about is like just traditional church versus like some other expressions of that. I want to be clear, as one who we have sermons, like we are a traditional model who is really trying to grow in other ways, especially with there's this almost Grand Canyon gap between younger generations of in order to hear something, there's got to be some trust built. And so,
yeah.
So I am, as one who practices this, sees the fruit and the importance of sharing the word and koinonia, fellowship gathering. Like there is, I'm not advocating that we get rid of all that stuff. What I am advocating for, though, is that it doesn't stop with something. If it's just information, the 5 to 10% retaining, that's we're wasting our time. Literally, just think about this. We could preach the best sermon of our life with like, you walk away and people will forget it within a day or so. If there's not a discussion or application, they may remember something or some part of it, but there has to be application, chewing on it, making it their own. And so this is what the avocation is like. How do we grow that part and not just depend on that as we have for so long?
Yeah, that's good. Well, so to piggyback on that, Timmy, what you talked about, how can churches create spaces where the younger generation or young adults specifically can feel known and not just taught, where that discipleship can take place?
Yeah. If I can use my own failings as an example to lead into that, of like banging my head against the wall of like, why can't I get you guys to show up to something? Like, because I'm going to tell you, what younger people, they are really good at boundaries. Like they protect family time. There may be some prioritization things that what is actually, I don't want to go into that, but I had this frustration for
another episode.
I had this frustration of like, man, I'm inviting them to, like, you say, I'm getting questions like, man, I really want this, or, will you help me? And of course, like, I can't meet individually with everyone, and this is why they empower it, right? But like, hey, I will get a group together kind of thing. So a long story short, it requires curiosity. You have to ask them, what do you do? What do you do for fun? What do you like? And so as I started noticing with a group of 20-year-olds that they love disc golf. I can play disc golf. So nice. So I couldn't get them to show up to a class or a rooted or, different things like that. Literally could not do that. But what I could get them to show up to was, will you go play disc golf with me? Like, all of a sudden, open time, free to do those things. And so I started that I just had to be curious of like, what do they care about? What do they like? What do they want to do? And
That's good.
and
That's
so
really good.
we actually got a group together. We started rotating. We just say, hey, do you want to meet on this time? Like you literally, if you programatize it or put a schedule on or something, like if it's not organic, it's like, oh my goodness, it's like nailing Jello to a wall. I love you. I love you, younger generation. You are our future. But
Yes.
and I would just come with a question at first, like, hey, what do you guys think about this? And that just led to organic conversations, led to, hey, what can we pray about? And then I said, hey, do you guys want to read a book or something? Because here's what I heard you guys all wrestling with, and or listen to a book. Because if you say read a book, so no. But so we read After Doubt by A.J. Swoboda, great book, especially for that age group of. And I'll use this word and say it because this has been a triggering word for so many. I'm going to say it anyway. Deconstruction happens. It is happening in the 20. We can't ignore it or turn our back on it or make it into something. This is what happens when we mature and grow. People find out it's healthy to do that.
Yeah,
it becomes your own. We can be there a part of it, or we can say, no, that's not true. That's not happening. That's a bad word. We're not going to talk about it. Or we can actually engage them and help them through that time by being curious. And so I went into that, and that was a good resource to be able to do that. So
I think a couple of things you mentioned there are ones that I would highlight is getting to where I am not trying to infantilize young adults, but when you work with toddlers, you get down on their level to have a conversation face to face of where they're at instead of speaking up from a height, right? Like that there's an importance of with little kids getting down to a level where they're at. And I'm not trying to say like we have to lower ourselves to a level, but it's the same as incarnational, right? It's going to where people are at and not expecting them to come to where we are. And so when you said like you were curious about what is important in their life and what are activities they enjoy and that's that same incarnational spirit of getting to where people are at and going to them instead of expecting people to come to us. And then I think also the shared activity, I learned this when I was a children's pastor. If I tried to get kids to sit in a circle and have a conversation with me about God, everyone is silent, there's no conversation. But if I'm sitting there and I'm coloring next to them, then a conversation will happen. And this happens with young adults to 80-year-olds. Like if I'm going to have a conversation with someone, it's much harder to have that conversation when we're just talking. But if we are sharing an activity together, whether it's sharing a meal or doing disc golf or, me with my knitting group or whatever, like that organically, the conversations that come out of that are going to be different than what happens if we're just sitting and saying we're here for the purpose of you need to have an answer and we're going to have a conversation. It feels much more organic and natural. So I think also I'm curious if the idea of scheduling it out makes it feel more programized and less relational to them. And then they feel like I'm a task instead of I'm in a relationship with someone and hanging out.
That's good.
So I think that the 20-year-olds and, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, like they're hungry for God. There's a revival happening in that grouping. Even I think when I'm glad that this was a chat GPT question and not because where it says like, why aren't they showing up for Bible studies? I would challenge that. They are showing up for Bible studies. It's just where are they showing up and in what context? They want genuine, authentic relationships and conversations. They want truth. They're being fed so much spin and AI and all. They want like deep personal relationships that have action, that get into hard things and being willing to have those conversations and wrestle things out with them. Deconstruction isn't the problem. It's the lack of reconstruction that happens that is the problem.
That's good.
It's when we deconstruct and leave things destroyed instead of bringing it back together and rebuilding it into something that is more authentic and genuine to what it should be.
And this is where
That's
to your
good.
Melissa, man, that was so good. This is where I have to be teachable as well. And my son has taught me so much, like being curious, because like he's been reading the Bible at his own accord with his high school kids for 3 years at 8 o'clock every night before bed. And I'm like, I heard this alarm going off, and I'm like, what is going on? Like I just saw a pattern where he'd just go away and he'd be in his room on the phone. I'm like, and so finally I'm like, what are you guys doing? He's like, hey, we're in a Discord group. We're reading the Bible together. My friends at high school are having like questions about it. And they literally this has been 3 years of them doing this. And then he's invited them over to the house where then I'm crying because he's like speaking blessings over them. Like, hey, let's say something, like he's pastoring these kids. And I'm like, this is what, but he is teaching me what they value. He's teaching me that they may not show up to youth group one night, which they do. If kids are showing and they are, but the relationship, they will show up on Discord and they are showing up every day. Like it's happening, and then they get together. So be curious. I'm asking him questions. I'm like, what do you think about this? And I think that's the gap. There is something really important as I watch leaders in my regional role, we have transitions going on. I've watched leaders make the important recognition that I need to invest in the next generation, and they're raising up their replacements. They're raising up, and this is not to shame anyone who hasn't done that whatsoever, but this is also to point out that we actually can be making disciples who've also pastor churches as well, moving forward. And so to watch the generation almost 2 or 3 generations older to make that shift, there has to be curiosity. There has to be a tell me more, because they think really differently, and there's some different values, as Melissa has pointed out, that they value relationship, authenticity, not program, not scheduling, not class style, but yeah, I'll come have dinner with you, or play a game with you, or play video games and talk in a live community kind of thing. Like I'm watching this stuff happen, and so kudos to those who are making that shift.
Well, I'm grateful for you guys and your time and your wisdom. I like to end things, and we've got a lot of great practical in this conversation. But maybe for somebody who's like, yeah, I need to grow in this area. I need to take a next step type of a thing, regardless if that's starting to begin with, or if it's like, I need to engage in this more. What would you recommend, or what's a really good next step for somebody when it comes to who am I discipling?
I would say it needs to start with prayer. Prayer of asking the Holy Spirit what things within your own mindset or expectations might need to shift. Helping to get a new understanding of success, of relationship with others. So I think we have to make sure we're in a healthy spot first. On our, and then also being aware of, Timmy, you had mentioned it earlier a bit, of like, who is already around me. God, open my eyes to who's around me. Who might I be discipling and not be aware of, or who do you have for me to disciple? Jesus passed a lot of people that could have needed healing or freedom, or that he could have called. And there was times where he was asked to do things and he said no. And so I think to be mindful of who in this season, God, are you leading me to disciple? And what is that going to look like, and what needs to shift in me first, to be able to do this in a healthy way? if we approach it programmatically or, as a responsibility, it's still not going to be quite what you're hoping.
That's good.
I do think, God works within anything. So I think if we're like, I want to disciple people, but maybe it'll help us to avoid some of the stumbling blocks or some of the mistakes if we start first with some prayer and some of that stuff. But I'm never going to shame anyone or expect, say you shouldn't be discipling someone, like any place is a great place to start.
Yeah.
But that is going to save you some pain, maybe. To start with some prayer there.
Absolutely.
And get some direction.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Melissa, definitely. I agree with that of like who's following you or who's the Lord. I would definitely start. I would start with that. I think the question of sometimes we get stuck is like, well, how do I do it? What does that look like practically? It's interesting to me that I don't know if many are aware of this, but we are in a biblically illiterate season, and the lens, and so there's not a knowledge of the word, so there's that aspect, but also interpretation. How people approach interpretation is through the lens of personal experience, and it's very subjective. There's a lot that's missing. That are some important elements to discipleship with spiritual disciplines of just reading the word together and helping them get good hermeneutics, praying together. Like you can go through spiritual disciplines with people and demonstrate those things and then ask them questions to help them start thinking in a way that is less me focused and my experience focused, and taking them into the passage and into what God is speaking. And letting Scripture interpret Scripture and context and all those things. Those are really important in this season, as I'm just seeing. I'm hearing messages and sermons from pastors and this is just me being honest about it, because I've done it myself, of like, of how we interpret Scripture. We create a God of our own understanding, and so very dangerous, not striking fear, but this is where it's an important aspect of hey, let's read the word and how do we rightly divide this? What, when, where, how questions, all that kind of stuff. So,
well, and I go back to I love both of those, and I think something that you mentioned just in the last question about specific to the the younger generations. I think there's so much of that can just be copy pasted into any generation, to any context of the curiosity, and then the invitation within that, and then also what is the Holy Spirit saying as we go and as we walk with those that we are discipling, and still keeping mindful that programs aren't bad, but they can be useful as long as that's it's a piece, not the piece, or the main mode of how we do things and how we operate within that. And it's not as daunting as you think. I really think at the end of the day, it's something that, we're all called. That is the mission of Jesus to us, is to go and make disciples. And so, he's not asking us to do something that's above our pay grade, so to speak, but that it is what we're called to do. And that's the mission of Jesus. And so, I'm really grateful. You guys have, you've helped really unpack this well, I think in a practical way and in a very personal way. And so I want to say thank you to you both for your time and all that you've given us today.
Thank you guys for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks again for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to connect further with our guest, we've made ways to do so available in the episode show notes. If you'd like to connect with us further, support the podcast, or sign up for show updates, just go to withouthatingit.com to get started. And don't forget to subscribe to Ministry Without Hating It wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss our future episode releases. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.